Good morning and welcome to the Foggy Dew. This is Colin. Well, gang, we're back at it. It's so funny. I was gone all last week. It's just good to be back doing the show and writing content. It's interesting, even when I was out of town last week doing other stuff, I keep thinking about the show all the time. Like I'm thinking about content for the show. I'm trying to make the show interesting and fun. Really what I want to do is each time I do a show, I want to make it better than the last one. The biggest challenge that I run into, like creating content for the show, is the news cycle. Like last week, I saw a great story for the show, and I'm like, man, that is a perfect story for the Dew. I can write a story really quick. It'll be hilarious. I was sitting there like, man, this is just perfect. And the problem with it is it's timing. If I record that clip or content or whatever on Wednesday when I see the story, then it's relevant. But if I have to wait till like Tuesday or Wednesday of the following week, that same story is ice cold. Like it's lost its zip to me. It could be that the story changed. The facts of the situation changed. The story changed. So this whole thing that I came up with last week doesn't even mean anything anymore. It's just, the whole thing's just thrown into chaos. So what I end up doing is I end up writing static stories, like a green story that I can say anytime. So I could write a story and then it just goes like on a stack of green stories that I have ready to pull out at any moment. And really what I want to do is I want to kind of merge those two things on the Dew, right? Like I want fresh news, topical events, but then I also want historical context. And I was sitting here thinking about all this stuff, like content of the show, like evergreen topics, things I've been discussing lately. So here I am, like driving across the US. I was driving across Kansas most of last week, and I realized that I haven't really talked about big chessboard in a while, and I wanted to remedy that. Because it seems to me just in the last week or so, there's been a bunch of like foreign topics that came up that I wanted to address. And I guess just look, I have a couple topics here, but I guess I'll start off with Latin America. It's very interesting to me because Latin America keeps swinging to the right. They keep becoming more and more conservative. And really, if you look at it, it's not just right, it's actually hard right. And having Latin America swing hard right like that is actually a really good thing for America. Because if you look at it from the American, and I don't really care about what happens in Latin America. I mean, I do kind of, right? But I care about America a heck of a lot more, obviously. But it's just interesting because you want nationalists in this hemisphere. We really don't need a bunch of communist states in our hemisphere causing problems. Because communist states are going to be aligned with who? BRICS. They're going to be aligned with the Chinas of the world, the Irans of the world, the North Koreas of the world, the Russias of the world. We need nationalist countries in our own hemisphere, in our own backyard. Because trust me, the last thing you want hanging around your country is a bunch of globalist communists. Well, what happened in Latin America just over the last few days? Well, Peru just swang hard right. Peru just elected a far-right leader named Keiko Fujimori. So Fujimori won in Peru. Now, the vote is not totally over yet. Fujimori is winning. It's 51% to 49% with 90% in. And the person that she's running against is a person named Sanchez, who's like a total communist in Peru. But if everything holds the way that it looks right now, Fujimori should win. And that's a good thing. So Fujimori's win total will actually get better as this keeps going. And what they're looking at right now is they anticipate it being about 55% to 45%. So that's really a good thing for the people of Peru. The margin matters, but the result is really the main deal here. And Peru going hard right is a good thing for you. And quite frankly, it's a good thing for the people of Peru. So now you have a bunch of different countries in Latin America that have swung hard right. You have Chile, Bolivia, Ecuador, Honduras, Costa Rica, and now Peru. All of those countries have gone hard right nationalist. And to be fair, that's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence at all. And the question that you want to ask yourself is, why did all these countries go hard right at the same time? Because it was all kind of in unison, right? Doesn't that seem kind of weird? Like, why all of a sudden would these countries that were trending socialist communist all of a sudden start electing hard right-wingers into their government. And I guess I would just urge you to think about this. The UN is broke. So the UN was providing slush funds to all these like developing countries like Peru, Costa Rica, etc. They were funneling globalist money into these countries. Well, beyond the UN, you also had USAID money. Well, that whole money spigot for USAID got shut off. The USAID was funding all of these NGOs that were siphoning money into these developing countries in Latin America. They were buying them off. So what they would do is they would find like-minded globalists in these countries and then start sending all their globalist pals money. And then the globalist pals inside of these countries would then take over the government. So what happens is when the USAID money spigot gets turned off, there's no more globalist funds to fund globalist voting efforts in these Latin American countries. And then I think the third piece beyond that is China. China would be the final piece to that. And I've talked about it many times on the show before. China has been booted out of this hemisphere in a lot of different ways. And let's be told, China was buying off these countries, completely buying them off. They were paying off politicians. They were paying for infrastructure. Basically, it's like a lease to own. China was basically buying all the roads and then charging places like Peru to use their own roads. But China was selling, these were developing markets for Chinese industry. So China is just all up in Latin America, buying people off, investing in these countries. And really what they're doing is they're subverting and corrupting these countries. But you had all of these factors. You had China's undue influence. You had USAID money, NGO money. And it's just interesting when all of these factors are eliminated. Like when you eliminated China, when you eliminated USAID, suddenly all of a sudden, when the cash goes missing, all of a sudden you start getting nationalists elected. That's a very illuminating process, isn't it? And there's no coincidences there. There's no coincidences when the money spigot for the globalists gets turned off that nationalists start winning. And good news for the US, good news for Peru. And I said this before, especially Peru, you get to keep your country. So all of these countries going hard right is a great development in this hemisphere. So that's the first piece of good international news. And I guess the second piece of international news that I wanted to talk about was Iran. And I really haven't addressed Iran. Man, it's probably been like a month or so since I've even addressed Iran, but there's bad news coming out of Iran. And the weird thing about Iran is that you're really not hearing a lot in the news about Iran. It's like this kind of stalemate. And it's not even a stalemate. It's just super quiet. There's no real news. And what's happening is you're having all these like little stories popping up. And I almost look at them like rumors. You hear Iran's doing this, then you hear Israel's doing this, then you hear this is happening, then you hear this is happening. And it's coming from all these disparate media sources, so you don't really know what to think. But there hasn't been a big development out of Iran in weeks and weeks, which is why I didn't really have anything to say about it. So why am I talking about Iran today? I think everybody is aware that the United States is trying to negotiate a deal with Iran, what's left of the Iranian government. I mean, hell, we've killed all the mullahs. We killed the supreme leader. We've decimated their ability to contest the Strait of Hormuz. We've degraded their military capacity. So what are we waiting on? Well, I think there's a bunch of problems with that, right? You don't even know who the legitimate government is. And then you're trying to cut a deal with people that can't even organize themselves. But here's the United States trying to negotiate a ceasefire to try to get all the nuclear material to have Iran de-escalate. And what happens in the middle of these negotiations? So the U.S. is negotiating with Iran late last week, and Iran all of a sudden just starts firing ballistic missiles at Israel. So Iran, in the middle of negotiations with the United States, starts firing ballistic missiles at Israel, principal actor in this whole thing. And what does Israel do? Israel starts firing rockets back at Iran. So you have Israel, who's supposed to be following our lead, actively lobbing ballistic missiles into the people that we're trying to negotiate with. And look, I'm not a military expert, but lobbing ballistic missiles at each other doesn't sound like a peace agreement is really close by. And if I step away from that situation and look at it, Israel is really a problem here. And why is Israel? Look, the US is in charge. Israel is in our sidecar on this whole deal. Israel is supposed to be along for the ride. They should not be responding like that, period. There should not be any retaliation. Iran caused absolutely zero damage on Israel, and then Israel just goes over the top. But the core of Israel responding does what? It undermines the United States in the negotiations. Why would Israel do that? So now they're acting independently when we're trying to close this deal. Israel is totally out of control here. They're either out of control or they're not listening to the United States. Neither one of those conclusions is a good thing. Those are major issues. Because again, first of all, what it does is it damages the negotiations. It delays peace. And really what it's doing, it's weakening the U.S. position in the negotiation. The other problem with Israel doing this is that it feeds this entire narrative domestically. There is a narrative that exists in U.S. politics right now, in circles on the right and circles on the left, that Israel is calling the shots here. That this is Israel's war and U.S. is just doing Israel's bidding. That's a bipartisan thought process. I mean, there are a lot of conservatives that think that. There are a lot of liberals that think that. And if you look at both segments of people, the one tie that binds there is that they're all done with Israel. They've had it. And you can look at any polling that shows that. The state of Israel is dropping like a rock in acceptance for support of the Israel government. And Israel acting in this rogue manner feeds this perception domestically. It feeds the perception that this is Israel's war, that Israel calls the shots in this administration, that somehow Donald Trump is a lackey of Benjamin Netanyahu. And I don't think at this point you can deny that, because if you have Israel lobbing ballistic missiles at Iran when we're trying to negotiate with them, then that would indicate to me that Donald Trump does not have control of the situation. Because if Donald Trump had control of the situation, he would tell Israel, you stand down. You don't do anything. We've got to get this thing buttoned up. Because if Israel's just acting in any which way they want and firing missiles just indiscriminately, then that would tell me that Donald Trump does not have command of all assets on the ground. I just mentioned a minute ago that Israel is losing friends fast in the U.S., and really what they're doing now, by firing like this, they're putting Trump in a bad spot. I voted for Donald Trump 3 times, but he needs to get out of this. That's enough. And look, just to level the playing field, I totally understand going into Iran. I get it. Iran was a China proxy. Nobody in any administration ever had taken these guys on seriously. Iran had been a growing threat to world peace for 30 or 40 years. They're acting as a Chinese proxy. You do not want a nuclear Iran. You don't want a nuclear Iran, and you don't want a well-armed Iran or a nuclear Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz. You cannot have long-term world security with a rogue actor who is fanatically terrorist because of their own religion. You can't have it, especially where they sit on the major artery of global shipping for oil. So again, backing up, I understand the action in Iran. I understand the thought process of Donald Trump going into Iran. However, the way that this was positioned by the administration is that this was supposed to be 8 to 12 weeks. And we're past that point now. Not only we passed that point, we have one of the principal actors in this firing ballistic missiles at the people that we're trying to negotiate with. So I guess the question that you might want to ask yourself is, what exactly is the plan here? Because I'm not hearing anything coming out of the administration about what they're planning on doing and wrapping this up. And the only thing I can tell you for certain, just looking at it pragmatically, is that Donald Trump wants a deal. That would be an obvious conclusion to draw. The problem with that is Donald Trump doesn't just want a deal. Donald Trump needs a deal. He needs a deal here. And the problem with that is that places like Iran, China, they know that. Because China, Iran, Russia, all these other bad actors, they want this to drag on and on and on and on. Because they know the longer this goes on, the worse the deal is going to be for the United States. And the worse the optics are going to be for the United States. It looks like the United States has lost control. That we can no longer exert influence on people. And the problem with this is that time, that valuable asset, time is on Iran's side here. It is not on Donald Trump's side. Donald Trump needs this over ASAP. Because if this thing keeps dragging on, this whole Iran situation keeps dragging on, the worse it's going to get politically for Donald Trump and the GOP. And I guess the easiest way to just distill this is that I was okay with this action, but I was promised an exit strategy. And I'm not seeing a clean exit strategy at this point. And look, to be fair, I think we're getting closer. Iran has been totally degraded. They've lost a lot of their assets. Their communication is all leveled. We've secured the area. I think we're getting closer to a deal, but just watching this back and forth with Iran and Israel just makes you scratch your head. Because I think anybody being honest, like I really just want to fix domestic issues. I think everybody wants that. Like I would love to just retreat off the world stage and say, you know what? I don't really care who controls the Strait of Hormuz, but that's not reality. The United States cannot retreat from the world and just come back home and just work on our own things. You cannot have a China running the Strait of Hormuz. You cannot have China running the Panama Canal. You cannot have Chinese vessels running shipping lanes all throughout the Atlantic and the Pacific. That's got to be under U.S. control. Waging a years-long war in Iran is not what I signed up for when I voted for Trump in 2024. And I guess the fallout from that, the second part of that, is Israel. Forget Israel. Israel is a real problem in U.S. politics, and I'm sick of it. That is a bipartisan viewpoint at this point. The war in Gaza looked like a war crime, and now you've got this. Israel could have done nothing this weekend. Iran is flailing about. Let them flail. Nobody insulted your honor. You don't fire targeted missiles when your benefactor is cutting a peace deal. Not if you're interested in a peace deal. That doesn't seem like Israel's really interested in a peace deal if they want to start shooting ballistic missiles at people. It's just a really bad look for everybody. But I mentioned time. The midterms are coming fast here. So the sooner that Donald Trump gets it done, the sooner everybody in the public consciousness will be able to forget this and move on to the conclusion. You've got the 250th anniversary of America coming up, a red, white, and blue party. You close a deal in Iran. You have the 250th anniversary. Everybody's ready for the midterms and they're in a good mood. But if this thing keeps dragging on all the way up to the midterms, Donald Trump and the GOP are going to have real problems. They are still positioned to control the Senate. It's going to be a coin toss on the House. I actually saw some really encouraging data coming out of the House races, but the Republicans should control the House, Senate, and the presidency come November. But this Iran thing is just it is a blight on the administration at this point, and they've got to wrap it up. So anybody that thinks I'm some Donald Trump fanatic, some toady for Donald Trump, I'm being very critical of Donald Trump here. I was willing to go along with this, but I think I'm at a point where it's like, you got to wrap it up. Fix the domestic issues, win the midterms, save the country, save the future. That's what you're tasked with. That's the task. So anyway, I'm watching the Iran situation. I don't want anybody to think I'm like ignoring it. I'm watching the situation, but I just didn't have anything to say about it. Anyway, I guess we'll all be watching it. So switching gears, there are some really, really interesting cultural developments occurring right now in the U.S. And I've said it many times on the show before, but politics is downstream from culture, and the culture in the U.S. is changing. And I think it's changing for the better. So what did I see that made me feel a little bit better about the future here? Well, I've been looking a lot at the movie industry. What you're seeing coming out of Hollywood now is just all garbage, right? You just had these huge box office bombs coming out, like major bombs. This one that just came out recently is Mandalorian and Grogu. That's like a new Star Wars flick. The budget to create that Mandalorian movie was $300 million. Well, as of last week, The Mandalorian had only grossed about $250 million. So this is Star Wars, the golden franchise of Hollywood, literally a cash cow of Hollywood that was destroyed by woke, bad storylines, bad acting, all of it. You have a $300 million budget for a Hollywood cash cow, and it's lost $50 million. $300 million to make, grossing $250 million. That is a bad investment. It doesn't matter. I mean, you cannot afford to absorb those kind of losses if you're Disney. But you have things like Masters of the Universe, Mandalorian and Grogu, these like summer blockbuster movies that used to come out in the summertime. But the list of Hollywood bombs at this point is becoming endless. All Hollywood has been doing over the last few years is like churning out this like woke crap. And you could even see it in streaming services. Like you have Star Wars, Star Trek. They've been infected by this like woke poison. But I think you have to look at Hollywood more directly and say, okay, why is that happening? And really what it is that Hollywood has no real diversity anymore. It's all fake. You don't have conservatives and liberals kind of like in that ideological like contest where you can actually create good ideas. It's all just single party thought. Woke does not really allow for a diversity of thought. It's you have to think this way. Well, being forced to think a certain way does what? It stifles creativity. Well, if you have creativity being stifled, then you're not creating art. Because art has to have soul in it. There's no soul in woke. There's no creative spark in woke. Because it's woke is not designed to be creative. It's designed to control. Well, even if you move beyond the creative thought that's going on in Hollywood, all the stars are leaving Hollywood. Most normal actors that you look at that were actors like 20 years ago, all of those people are fleeing the state. They're moving to like Nashville. They go to Idaho. They go find these little farms and get away from the insanity of Hollywood. So you have all the stars leaving, the people that actually people would go attend movies to go see certain actors. Those people are leaving the state. And then you have Hollywood doubling down on bad actors, bad scripts, bad politics. They have these like massive budgets with woke stories. Nobody's watching it. It's a bad cycle. It's a bad business model. And Hollywood is done, and you're seeing a shift away from Hollywood, which is great. And two tiny movies are proving this entire point. So I've been watching these two movies coming out. The first one is Obsession, and then Backrooms. And Backrooms is really interesting. I actually want to see Backrooms really bad. Backrooms was actually an internet meme that came out on 4chan back in 2019. It was like just this weird little thing that was on 4chan. Well, that whole thing about Backrooms on 4chan kind of kept evolving. It evolved to the point where you had this 20-year-old kid named Kane Parsons who ended up getting money from A24, which is like a startup studio. So this kid, Kane Parsons, made a feature film through A24 about this meme. So Parsons' budget on this Backrooms feature film from A24 was $10 million. So he gets $10 million from A24 to create a movie, 20-year-old kid. That movie, Backrooms, is going to gross at this point over $200 million. So a $10 million investment is going to get A24 $200 million. That is a good investment, as opposed to $300 million for Grogu and then losing $50 million on it. So Backrooms is like this massive success story in the movie industry. Well, Obsession is the second movie that is very similar story to Backrooms. And actually, my wife and kids actually went and saw this Obsession movie late Friday night, and they loved it. Well, Obsession had a $450,000 budget, so not even $1 million. Obsession had a $450,000 budget. This movie, Obsession, is going to gross close to $250 million plus. So not even $1 million investment is going to net $249 million in profit. That is a business model. And it's interesting because I talked about the 20-year-old director of Backrooms. Obsession was directed by a 26-year-old YouTube person. So you have a 20-year-old and a 26-year-old leading a film rebellion. Amazing. That's great news. And the parallels to all of this stuff is just so obvious. Hollywood is the establishment. Hollywood is the establishment class, same as the rhinos and the Democrats. They're the ones pushing globalism. Hollywood is pushing globalism. It's pushing woke, all the stuff that people are rejecting. Hollywood is lazy. It's not dynamic. They have no real ideas. It's a tired formula, bloated budgets, bad business, old operators. It's no different than journalism. You have ABC, CBS, NBC. All of those major media companies are laying off all their high-priced talent. They're firing, these people like Scott Pelley are getting fired all over the place. It's the same as like a Colbert and Kimmel. Nobody is watching these people. CBS, NBC, ABC, all the news departments, all of their shows, they have these massive budgets and no ratings. Stephen Colbert was making $40 million a year on a show that was losing $200 million. He had a staff of like 200 people. It's a failed business model. In 10 years, nobody's going to have a late night TV show because mainstream cable is not even going to exist anymore. These people are not funny. They're not reporting news. It's all of it. They have zero ratings. It's a bad business model. And if you look at CBS, NBC, and all those other like news outlets, those models, that model of like the CBS News, that provides no real journalism. And not only does it not provide journalism, what it does is it actually creates daylight. It creates a lane for competitors. By them not doing their job, they create space for other entrants into the market. And you already saw that. Look at a kid like Nick Shirley. Nick Shirley was, I think he was a 23-year-old kid with a cell phone. So a 23-year-old kid with a cell phone went up to Minnesota and took out a VP candidate doing investigative journalism. And bear in mind, CBS News, NBC News, ABC News all sat there and feted Tim Walz in the entire run-up to the 2024 election. They didn't get into any of the fraud in the state. They didn't do what they're supposed to do, which is investigative journalism. It took a kid with a cell phone doing their job for them to achieve any measurable results and put some sunlight on Tim Walz. And if you want to look at it that way, they're actually aiding and abetting a crime. Their job as journalists is to keep these people honest, and they didn't do that. But again, back to the point, it's Hollywood is the same as all this stuff. Hollywood, NBC, CBS, all these, they lost the plot. They got lazy, man. And I think it's so exciting with Backrooms, with Obsession. The path forward in movies is totally clear now. You don't need this huge budget. What you need is creativity. You need good ideas. You need plots that work. Having an alternative in media, in movies, that is a good thing for the culture. And what that means to you is that society is being democratized. You don't need to get in with the establishment to make your own way in the world. And why is that? It's because the establishment is dying. If you're a J school kid and you want to go get into journalism, the last thing you should be doing is hitching your wagon to a place like NBC News. If you are a J school kid right out of college and you wanted to be a real journalist, I would see if you could go get 15 minutes with Nick Shirley and hitch your wagon to that kid's train. And I guess if you look at like movies and streaming shows and all this, as AI grows, that shift away from big boxes, like big blockbuster stories, that's going to accelerate. Because AI is going to democratize the creation of movies and art. It'll be a heck of a lot easier for creators to make movies, art, music. That AI will be used as a tool to help accelerate the establishment's decline. And you can look at it anywhere in society. All these people, it's so interesting. Like, look at like up and comers in politics. You see these guys, Bill Cassidy in Louisiana, John Cornyn, Rhinos are going extinct in politics. What we're doing is we're getting young blood in there. These old establishment people are being exposed. They don't work. So if they don't work, what do we got to do? We got to get new tools. Don't ever fall in love with politicians. Fall in love with ideas and fall in love with results. I don't care about sound bites. I care about results at this point. Every politician is a tool. So even if they get in and they say all the right things, it's about results. But I think all of this stuff is so amazing with these movies. I think it's a total turnover in U.S. culture. I think it's wonderful. And I guess that's good news because the old paint is being peeled away. And there are good things ahead, guys. I'm excited. I was talking to my son about this stuff. He's 17. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for young people if they use and leverage this stuff correctly. They have a lot of opportunities. What a time to be alive for them. They're going to see a whole new culture emerge, and they have the ability to be on the front end of it if they think ahead and think strategically. Anyway, congrats to these young pioneers. I'm very excited to see young, a 20-year-old, 26-year-old really leading a charge. Good for you guys. Awesome work. So, switching gears, I saw something the other day that I had forgotten about. Totally forgot about this, and it made me laugh out loud, and I just wanted to share it. And I guess I'll just start off by saying this. Like, I've said this many times on the show, but like, history doesn't repeat itself. It doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes. It's almost like an echo. And like, you can look at any situation today, and there's a historical parallel to it. It's like a rhyme from the past. And I saw this thing, and again, it just made me laugh out loud. And I guess the best place to start, like, telling this story is back in 519 BC. Back in 519 BC, that was the year that Lucius Cinncinatus was born. And you might ask yourself, who was Cinncinatus? And if that name sounds familiar, Cinncinatus, it's because Cincinnati, Ohio is named after him. And most people don't even know that. But Lucius Cinncinatus was born in 519 BC in Rome. Well, who was Cinncinatus? He was a political figure in the early Roman Republic. He was like an esteemed statesman in the Roman Republic. His son, however, Cincinnatus' son, was a radical. Well, not only was he a radical, he was also a violent person. So Cincinnatus' son would lead like these violent gangs in Rome. And these gangs were actually trying to overthrow the legitimately elected government in Rome. Well, beyond trying to overthrow the government, these gangs would attack citizens. These kids, it was like a bunch of like hooligans. They would like go in and interrupt the Senate. Well, so what happened is that you had Cincinnatus, who was like this political statesman. Everybody respected him, but he just had this like crazy kid that was causing all these problems. So then what happened is that Cincinnatus' son was actually arrested for all this crazy behavior that he was doing. So his son is arrested, and then Cincinnatus bails him out. Well, so Cincinnatus bails this kid out, and then what did the kid do? He actually fled Rome. So Cincinnatus' son is bailed out of jail by Cincinnatus. He flees Rome. Well, then what happened after he flees is that the state declared him a capital offender in absentia. Well, in Rome, what that meant is the person that bailed him out was in a lot of trouble. So here you have Cincinnatus, the well-meaning father here, again, a statesman in the empire. Well, Cincinnatus is forced to pay these like huge fines for his son's behavior. He had already bailed him out of jail. He's dealing with all the political fallout of his son acting like a fool. Then the son flees, and now he's just like in all these problems. Cincinnatus having all these problems. Well, all of those fines and all that ended up bankrupting Cincinnatus. That bankruptcy that he had to go through forced Cincinnatus to sell all of his estates. He ended up resigning from public life in disgrace because of his son. So Cincinnatus' life is basically ruined, right? He kind of leaves Rome with his tail between his legs, and he goes off grid. He just leaves Rome entirely. He's, you know what? I just look like a complete fool here. I'm totally embarrassed. I'm just going to go live in a rural environment. I don't want to deal with any of this. So Cincinnatus goes off grid, and he just went to go work a small farm in peace. Well, a few years after all that, in 458 BC, Rome was attacked. So in 458 BC, Rome was attacked by these Italic tribes called the Achae. Well, the Achae's attack was unexpected. So Rome was not expecting these attacks. So the Achae's are actually making some hay here. Well, Rome itself was in peril because they had gotten this far into the interior that Rome was getting ready to fall. Well, so the Senate convened in a panic. They're like, we don't know what to do. We've got to fix this. The Achae are coming in. We're going to get overrun. We need a solution. What the Senate decided, as the Achae were marching into Rome, they decided that they needed a dictator. So the Senate says, we need a dictator. We need somebody that can just take over things, save us from the Achae, take command of the military. What the Senate wanted, they wanted a dictator that would take command of Rome for like 6 months. That dictator would be given unilateral control by the Senate to defend Rome. Well, the Senate chose Cinncinatus. They decided to go to the disgraced statesman and have him be the dictator. So what happened is that the Senate, after they made this decision to have a short-lived dictator, well, the Senate dispatched men to Cinncinatus' farm to get him back. So the Senate sends these men out, and the Senate finds Cinncinatus out plowing his fields. Imagine the scene here. So the Roman Senate comes out, and here is the disgraced Cinncinatus plowing his field. So they walk up to this guy in the middle of his field, and the Senate delegation asked him to go put on his toga. Cinncinatus asked, is everything all right? The Senate said, we need you to put on your toga before we can have a conversation. So Cinncinatus has his wife go grab his toga. Once he was properly dressed, Cinncinatus was then informed by the Senate that he was now dictator of Rome. The Senate envoys in this field explained the threat. So Cinncinatus, realizing the problem in Rome, he accepts, and he goes immediately to the Senate. So he goes directly to Rome. So he goes to Rome, convenes the Senate, accepts his dictatorship, and he says, I have a plan for the Achae. What he did was Cinncinatus marshaled every able-bodied man to fight for Rome. Well, under his leadership, the Romans defeated the attackers. So they repel the Achae. So what happened? Cinncinatus is a hero. He literally did this in like 2 weeks. So he had the whole problem mopped up in 2 weeks. So he's a hero, all the things. The problem with it is Cinncinatus now is also dictator in charge of the Roman army. Cinncinatus had no oversight. He had no term limit. He had no checks or balances. So Cinncinatus at this point had total control and absolute power. So dictator Cinncinatus is in complete control of Rome. What did Cinncinatus do with all that power? He gave it up. He gave it up. After 16 days, I told you it only took a couple weeks. After 16 days, Cinncinatus resigned as dictator. He gave his power back. He gave it away. Unlike most men, Cinncinatus gave up the power that was given to him. He took off his toga and he went back to his plow. So the civic-minded Cinncinatus gave up unlimited control of Rome and went back to work his farm in peace. He worked his farm for another 20 years, and guess what happened? A conspiracy rocked Rome 20 years later. There was a wealthy Roman that was buying off the loyalty of the poor. He was basically subverting the government. So this Roman was buying off the poor people, and he was usurping the Senate. What this guy was doing by paying poor people, what he was doing is he was fomenting a populist revolt against the Senate. So there's this conspiracy going on that's undermining the Senate. So at the ripe old age of 80, the Senate goes to Cinncinatus again. They call Cinncinatus again. He was made dictator a second time. Cinncinatus accepted the dictatorship of Rome a second time. What did he do? He immediately crushed the conspiracy. He had this guy arrested, everybody arrested that was involved in this conspiracy. So Cinncinatus comes back in from the plow and he saved Rome again. That crisis, the second crisis, was averted after 21 days. So 21 days, the situation is under control. What did Cinncinatus do? He resigned again. Cinncinatus gave up his power voluntarily yet again. Cinncinatus, by doing this twice, he had unlimited power and gave it up. He became a Roman legend. This guy was twice granted absolute power and resigned it. His civic virtue embedded Cinncinatus into the Roman ethos. He was the ultimate Roman. He was the guy that everybody looked at in Rome. The ultimate Roman citizen. He was a man of high honor, a man of high integrity. Cinncinatus was Rome. Well, so then you might ask yourself, why are we talking about Cinncinatus? The historical parallels. The historical parallel to Cinncinatus becomes the question you might want to ask yourself. What other man in human history had unlimited power and gave it up? Who is similar to Cinncinatus in human history? The only equivalent that you can look at in all of human history is George Washington. George Washington is the echo in history to Cinncinatus. And let's be honest, do you know the time frame there? 2,200 years after Cinncinatus, Washington did the same. George Washington was the ultimate American, same as Cinncinatus was the ultimate Roman. George Washington was the military leader of the revolution. Washington could have been king. Washington could have been dictator for life. Washington made the Revolutionary Army stand down. He made the army stand down. He relinquished control of the military. He reluctantly became president. He did not want to be president. He reluctantly became president. George Washington served the people. He was president for 2 terms and then retired. He didn't have to do that. Washington didn't have to do any of this, but George Washington relinquished his power when he could have kept it. And what did Washington do? Washington went home to Mount Vernon. Washington went to his farm, same as Cinncinatus. Now, you might ask yourself, what was the historical perspective, like the world perspective when Washington did this? What did people think about that? This was so alien a concept to people in Europe, they couldn't believe it. Again, the only person historically that did it was Cinncinatus. The European mind could not conceive that somebody like George Washington would concede his power. In Europe, where you had kingdoms, nascent nation states, any man that had that type of power would not relinquish it. He would rule forever as king. So the European mind can't even conceive of this. Nobody could conceive of what George Washington did. Well, George Washington, because of all this, because of his selfless behavior and being the ultimate American, George Washington is called the American Cinncinatus, a reluctant hero of the Republic. And history is really funny. Because the funny thing about it is that society really is best served by people that do not seek power. The people most fit to lead in a society are the people that do not want power. And the problem with it, you look at that today, the problem today is that people in charge seek power. And especially in places like America, money is used to buy power. It's all about power now. It's not about the civic virtue. It's not about defending the realm. It's not about the people. Because that drive by individuals to seek power through money or fame diminishes what? It diminishes the people's power, the people of the republic, the citizenry. And by that lust for power, by people trying to get into politics, what that does is it aggregates power to the top because you're creating a bum rush to the top. And really, that's how you end up with the people that we have today. That is exactly how you end up with people. These are people that are seeking power. They're not seeking to serve the citizenry. That's how you end up with an Obama, with a Biden, with a Trump, a Hillary, Ted Cruz. Those people seek power. Now, the only thing that's interesting, I think Donald Trump probably less so. Like, this is all at scale, right? But I mean, he's not taking a salary. All those other people took salaries and all the other things that go along with it. But again, I guess the point is that all these people now are not seeking to serve the people. They're seeking to serve themselves. Like, you look at a person like Hillary Clinton, she absolutely craves power. Look at Barack Obama. Barack Obama craves attention. If he goes 5 minutes without somebody like drooling over him, he gets upset about it. So I guess, why would I be laughing at this story and thinking about Cinncinatus? Why would I laugh at Cinncinatus and this 2,000-year-old guy? What would I have seen that would have made me laugh? Why would I find it amusing? Well, I saw this clip from 2024. I saw a clip that came up from 2024, and I remembered watching it when it happened. But basically what it was these clip of these MSNBC people. And what they were doing is they were talking about how when Biden got out of the 2024 election, like, the man had just shown everybody his dementia in real time on the debate stage with Trump. And then what Biden did shortly after the debate, he resigned from running for president. He decided to step away. And I talked about, I think it was last week or whatever it was, I talked about how Biden was totally exposed in that debate. Shortly after the debate, he resigns. Well, this clip from MSNBC was these two clowns from MSNBC in this clip comparing Biden at that point, when Biden resigned from the 2024, they were comparing Biden to Cinncinatus. These two airheads were talking about how Joe Biden was somehow comparable to Cinncinatus. That Biden was somehow doing this, that he was somehow resigning from the presidential race for civic virtue. And I guess, look, I watched the clip and I laughed out loud. And it's like the starry-eyed worship of a person like Joe Biden after he was shown to be a dementia patient is so laughable. Like this like idealistic starry-eyed view of like this civic-minded Joe Biden. That is such a joke. Such a joke. The only reason that this guy resigned is because he came across with an applesauce brain on live TV. He was a walking cadaver with dementia on mainstream TV. And he didn't drop out for any civic virtue. He would have kept going. The Democrat Party forced him out. They forced him out, man. They sat him down and said, look, Grandpa, you're done, man. We're sending you to the glue factory. You get out or we're going to get you out. 1,000. Anybody that's being honest knows that Joe Biden would have stayed in that deal if he hadn't gotten exposed in prime time, because the guy's an egomaniac. And it's so funny, like Biden's own perception, but Joe Biden is 1,000% convinced that he is a transformative historical figure. And I guess in some ways, Joe Biden was right. He is a historical figure. He will be on the Mount Rushmore of famous clowns. Bozo, Ronald McDonald, Pennywise, and Joe Biden. It'll be the Mount Rushmore of clowns. That's his historical bracket. All the titans of the clown world. But this idea of this clip comparing Joe Biden to Cinncinatus is the height of delusion. Like, lay off the peyote. Lay off the peyote, or I guess don't be stingy with your drug dealer's contact info. It's hilarious. Joe Biden, the closest thing Joe Biden would be, it would be like an American Caligula. He would like be appointing his horse to the Senate. I guess he kind of did that with Justice Jackson at the Supreme Court. He appointed his horse to the Supreme Court. Just unbelievable. The guy was a total dementia patient that had no idea what was going on. But anyway, I saw this clip and I laughed out loud, and it made me think about Cinncinatus. But anyway, you probably didn't even know that Cincinnati was named after Cinncinatus, but that's where it comes from. But you have Cinncinatus and you have George Washington in the pantheon of civic-minded leaders that gave up power because the state needed them to. The ultimate Roman and the ultimate American. Okay, I'll go ahead and wrap the show up for today. If you like the show, please go ahead and tell a friend about it. If you would, please follow us on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram at Foggy Dew Daily. If you have questions for the show, you can go ahead and email us at foggydew95@gmail.com. But in the meantime, I'd ask you to say a prayer, ask questions, and stay vigilant. This is the Foggy Dew, signing off.